Hello, today is Thursday, January 28th, 2021. My name is Evan Solis. I'm interviewing Daniel Garza for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Mr. Garza, that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. If there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting, so I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on.
Okay.
1, Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes.
Okay. Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes.
Do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. And just 2 more questions. No, I'm sorry. Yes, 2 more questions. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in our research. That entire form is kept in a secure Voces server. Before we send it to the Benson, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview, that is that pre-interview form, in your public file available to researchers at the Benson? It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Yes. Basically, the pre-interview form that we did, we would strip out any of the contact information, but we would like to add that to your file. Do you consent? Do you agree to let us do that?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And finally, on occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Consent to give out my email and what else?
Yes, or your phone numbers or your email with journalists from legitimate news outlets.
Sure.
And just so you're aware, Mr. Garza, I've been having some internet problems. I'm actually going to switch right now. If at any moment, I'm hoping this does not happen, but if any moment I cut out or I leave the call, please just give me 5 minutes. I will be back immediately.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Sounds good.
There you go. Yeah. Well, just like that. That should be better now. Okay. So just so you're aware, Danielle, this is going to sort of have 2 parts. I'd like to ask you about your personal background and then more about sort of your political work, LIBRE, the LIBRE Initiative, and sort of the past year. To start off with, though, could you just share sort of a background on you, who you are, your history, and what you're spending your time with today?
Who I am? I am Daniel Garza, born in Denuba, California, to parents who were from a small town in northern Mexico, Garza, González, Nuevo León, Mexico, which is near Monterrey, Nuevo León, the closest urban center. I was born in '68, so my parents were farm workers who would travel across the West looking for opportunities in the agricultural fields and orchards of America as farm workers. My parents were in California at the time that I was born in '68. They were picking grapes, and then after that, we moved over to the state of Washington, where we sort of settled. Still continuing some, migration to Nebraska in the summers and California, and then we would spend our winters mostly in Mexico. We were farm workers up until the time I was 19 years of age. It was that time where I got a job working at a local police department as a radio dispatcher, and then got an opportunity to test for police officer, patrolman at 21. And so went to the police academy and was a cop until I was 22. And then ran for city council and won. And it was during my time as...
Shoot. Well, I apologize. Let's try this again, Danielle. So could you, last thing I heard was you were city councilman. You had just won at 21 or 22. Could you go on from there, please?
Yeah. So I ran for city council and I won. I was the only Latino on the city council, so that was good stuff. So after that, I got involved in the Bush campaign in 2000, and then after the election win, they invited me part of the administration at the Department of the Interior. So I worked there for 3 years, and then moved over to the White House at the Office of Public Liaison for a couple more before moving on to working for Univision, and then and now working at the LIBRE Initiative, which I've been at for over 10 years, almost 10 years now, here in Texas. And the organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, that advances the principles of what we call a free society, where we reverse the centralization of power and money and control in Washington, D.C. back to the individual. So that's the work we do.
Yeah, quite a lot of background to dive in there. I want to, since this is for our Voices of a Pandemic project, I want to begin by focusing specifically on your experiences during this pandemic. If we go back a year in time, when the news is just beginning to break about this virus that's coming over from China, do you remember? Is there a time that you remember thinking, sort of a moment that indicated to you, oh, this is something that is going to be serious. This is not just some news of the day. Was there something that you remember, or a period in time where you began to realize the pandemic was here to stay?
Sure. I mean, look, we had a busy agenda as we were gearing up for the year. Obviously, it was an election year, so we were going to be we had already announced our endorsement for several Senate races and congressional races in the primaries. And so the fact that we were beginning to cancel a lot of travel and meetings and events that we had set up, of course, let you know right away that this was real serious. Of course, just listening to the news and picking up what was going on across the country. I think late March, you got an immediate sense that things were not going to be normal for a while.
What about just in your personal life? So there in Mission, were there high case rates? Were you taking it seriously? Was it something that, or when I say taking it seriously, was it something that you were worried about regarding your own health or the health of your family or a certain family member? Was it something that worried you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I recall that at the time we didn't know much about coronavirus, how infectious it was, how it spread, what the symptoms were, and what could be the resulting consequences. So all that was still sort of being figured out. So it was a question of, más vale prevenir que lamentar, right? Just
right.
Being more preventative than actually taking safety precautionary measures. Just listening to what the experts in the news were saying, try to glean as much information about how serious this was, because obviously the fact that there were shortages of certain products and services, stores were being closed down, the economy was being shut down, schools were being shut down, institutions were being restricted, obviously things weren't right. There was something abnormal about everything. And so obviously you just wanted to keep your family safe as much as possible without I think imposing too much of a burden on what were normal activities.
Sure. You said in our pre-interview that a family member of yours contracted COVID. What is that, a close family member? What was that like?
Yeah, so we had several family members. In fact, my son had got it some point during the year that we know of. But cousins, aunts, uncles, some folks who were asymptomatic and some folks who got hit really hard. Had a couple of distant aunts who have passed away because of COVID.
Oh.
Or at least that's what we've been told. So we've taken it serious, but at the same time, we've tried to mitigate as much of the impact as possible. I've traveled often as much as I can to continue the work that we do in different parts of the country. But obviously doing it with all the precautions, the social distancing, the masks, the whole thing. We've had to change our method of outreach and advocacy at the organization, obviously because of the restrictions from state to state. We operate in 14 states where we have offices and staff. So you can, as you can very well imagine, each state has its own, rules and restrictions. So you have to honor that.
So your son, I'm assuming that was a mild case, nothing too serious.
Yeah. So my son Daniel, he had the dizziness and the fatigue and felt down and out for about 3 or 4 days, but nothing really serious. It was more like flu symptoms than anything else. Had some folks, who I go to church with, who got hit harder, had to be hospitalized because of the breathing and the lungs, and one of them was almost at the point of death, actually.
Oh, wow.
He had a terrific comeback, and so now he obviously tells the story, but he got hit hard. Other cousins, who have told their stories, it just varies, right? The level of severity of the symptoms that they got. It's weird how some people get hit hard and some people almost don't feel it at all.
Yeah. Are your children, I know you have several children, are they school age? Were they, I guess I'll start with that. Are they school age?
Yeah, no, all three have now graduated college. Marco and Camila graduated last year. Actually, they were graduating the month that COVID hit in March of last year. So yeah, they graduated at a really bad time.
Yeah.
When the economy got hit really hard, obviously, and job sector took a dip severely, and so, but they've managed to obviously do well, and that's good. It's positive.
Yeah. So down there in Mission, depending where you are, it seems like the different what you've mentioned as sort of these experts, the scientists rather, recommendations. The response varies a lot, right? So they're in Mission. What has been the general feel? Have folks been wearing masks? Have folks been avoiding gatherings at restaurants, bars? Were bars shut down locally, apart from the state ordered ordinances? I mean, what has been the response there locally for you?
Well, I mean, look, generally, if you walk into any store, any restaurant, or any government institution, they require masks, and I've yet to see anybody disregard that. I think most people have honored it. I think most people are considerate and respectful of each other. So I think I've been impressed, I think, with the people of the Rio Grande Valley on how they've reacted to the situation. Obviously, I think there's individual cases of anti-vaxxers or people who complain about the mandates of the mask, and look, I think there's an honest discussion to be had about the restricted access to public schools. I think we can do more. I think we can do more to open up businesses. It's unsustainable to actually shut down, or how we shut down schools and businesses in the first couple of months when there was sort of freak out, right? But I think people have learned to live with the pandemic, in the sense that respect the social distancing, respect the washing of the hands, and the masks wearing, and when we go to church, obviously everybody knows now in an orderly way to stay separated, to do the stuff on the hands. So there's a general knowledge about what we need to do, and I think people in South Texas have done fairly well. Still, the contagion is a contagion. So what's been important is to promote the vaccine and try to create a sort of herd immunity, from what I understand.
Have you received a dose of the vaccine yet?
I have not, no.
Is there a benchmark? So it sounds like you're towing a line, so to speak, where you're taking the measures, the safety measures seriously. You're also, trying to participate in your life. You're trying to live your life as much as possible. Is there a benchmark that you have in your mind, or that you and your family have discussed for, okay, this is when we're going to this for us will mean, okay, this is a return to normal, and we can probably stop worrying about this as much.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think we haven't had the discussion. Obviously, I think we're just sort of reacting in real time to, you know, what the circumstances are and what the reality is. If and when, you know, government officials, in their knowledge of, you know, the information that they're gathering, feels safe about no longer have to use masks or no longer need social distancing, then we'll respect that too. Right now, I think they're asking for the public to, you know, trust them with the restrictions. And again, I'm very open to the folks who want to have an honest discussion about how much to impose on the restrictions and how much to push back on that. But I'm also very open to beginning to open up the economy and open up our public institutions and public schools and things like that. So, I mean, I'm hoping for a quick recovery because of the vaccines. We need to get back to normal for the sake of, you know, the quality of life and the economy and, you know, these kind of things.
Yeah.
Our freedoms, really.
I want to talk a little bit about your professional career, and specifically interested in this Bush for president, the campaign in 2000. So if I understand right, you'd have been in your early 30s at that point. I've spoke to, you know, a handful of people for this project. I'm sure it won't surprise you to hear that as a Republican, Latino, Hispanic, you are in the minority of folks that I generally speak with. So I'm interested in knowing, you know, for you, if you put yourself in that time, at the turn of the millennium, what attracted you to the Bush campaign, and then what did your work look like?
So I'll say a couple of things. One is, I grew up in a Christian evangelical home, right? Normally, there's another exception to the rule where normally Latinos are Catholic by faith, right? My parents converted when I was 6. I was baptized Catholic, but when I say converted, both my parents became evangelical Christians when I was around 6 years of age. And so I grew up in a what I like to say, a Bible believing home, right? And that, I think, developed a lot of my values, and I draw from scripture a lot of what I believe, and my worldview, right? And so I also have to say, because I was a farm worker, working in the fields and orchards with my parents at the time, I missed a lot of school. So that by the end of the 10th grade, anyways, because of circumstances beyond my control, I didn't finish high school. 10th grade is the last grade I completed. And so it was having to hustle, having to work hard, put food on the table, take care of the basics kind of thing, right? But in spite of all that, what I mean to say by that is that I didn't have college or university. And so I wasn't influenced by college professors or by this liberal elite, you know, who control the institutions, who could indoctrinate or impose any kind of ideology. In retrospect, you know, I can say that now, right? So because of my Christian values, because of, you know, my hard work ethic that I grew up with my parents, I believe strongly in the free market system. I believe in equal opportunity, or advocating for changes and reforms that create an equal opportunity atmosphere for people. I don't think we're there, and I think that's why we're so focused on removing barriers that can position people better in the marketplace. And I've always believed from my father that capitalism, you know, was the preferred way for a society, because it allowed the individual to freely choose how he wanted to succeed, right? And the kind of decisions that he or she wanted to make in life were not imposed by a government. And so because of these things, and of course being pro-life, that I believed in a strong national defense, that I believed the government, one shouldn't look to government for a remedy to all the social ills under the sun. I identified more as a Republican because I was a conservative, because I was a Christian. And so because that influenced my life, it was easy for me to identify as a Republican. Because at the time, still, the Democrats were still very much a progressive, center left, dependent more on government programs, government help, government assistance, and I thought that wasn't an optimal way to help Latinos. What I wanted to see was actually increased productivity in the private sector. Again, I just giving you my mentalidad at the time.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So when I was a city councilman, I would be the guy who would be arguing against the raising of taxes, the raising of utility prices, the imposing so much burden on citizens. But at the same time, I recognized that there were barriers that Latinos faced disproportionately that maybe non-Latinos didn't. A lot of us didn't have driver's licenses. Even today, 33% of us don't have a high school diploma, and 30% of us only speak English. I mean, these are all major barriers to opportunity. And so if we're going to preach the free market system, well, if you don't have access to it, then it doesn't mean much to you. Or at least, the same kind of access that somebody else has who has all these things, right? So that's been my work, is to recognize that, yes, I vote based on my values, based on how I interpret scripture. But I also recognize that there are things we can do to remove barriers that can create better opportunity for people. So just because I'm a Republican doesn't mean I'm not conscious of barriers that exist in society that government can help remove. But to, I think, advocate as for government as that paternalistic kind of entity that can take care of everything and help you and allow you to achieve your dreams. Nah, I've never believed that. I still don't. And I'd rather have independent, free Latinos than ones who look to politicians for direction in life.
What for you would be, and you can be as wonkish or as just as vague, or rather as specific as you'd like. So talking about these barriers that are specific to large populations of the Hispanic community, can you talk more specifically about the role government can play, or that you think might be able to play in helping, as you're saying, level the field of opportunity so that these initial barriers can be overcome? Like, what is the role in your perspective then of the government to help make that playing field equal?
Yeah, so a lot of it is already detailed in the Constitution, right? On the role of government to print money, to have a judicial system that is impartial, that doesn't play favorites, that doesn't favor the connected, that politicians don't choose one business over the other, that we eliminate cronyism, right? Where because you're connected or because you gave contributions, you get exceptions or grants or concessions or funding or earmarks. That government can help, right? To not pick winners and losers in the private sector, to make sure that they have an impartial judicial system that where people are treated fairly, and we don't have a two-tiered justice system, right? Where minorities or people of less means are treated one way, and those who are connected and have money are treated a whole different way. That law enforcement doesn't impose or overly criminalize minority communities or those of lesser means, whether they're non-Latinos or Latinos, but give breaks to those who have title or position or money, right? And those are things that government can help with. That it doesn't use federal tax dollars to prop up one sector of the private sector and not another, like green energy, but not, fossil fuels. This kind of stuff is where government picking winners and losers is bad for everybody, because it breeds corruption and graft. And I think that's just a horrible way of governing. But it also, government has a role to play in providing safety nets for those who are truly dependent. I'm not adverse to that. So what I mean is senior citizens who cannot take care of themselves, veterans who we made promises to, children who are vulnerable, are truly dependent. So some of these folks, who are disabled are truly dependent, who have mental, challenges, may be truly dependent. And I think that's where government has to step in and take care of those who are truly dependent. But able-bodied people who have talents and skills, we should be looking to create opportunity in the private sector. And that means that the government sometimes either help to create an environment where there is job growth, where there is the ability for people to innovate, to create and generate productivity that creates opportunity. This is good stuff. This is, I think, where government can help. And that means not imposing so much taxes, not restricting job growth so much with needless and senseless regulations, not get in the way of energy development. These kind of things that create high-paying jobs, right? And also providing a quality education. And that quality education, I think, is made better through school choice, educational freedom, where parents are empowered to choose the school of their choice, for kids. If there's a failing public school system, the parents can choose to send them to a private school with their child, where the school can accommodate the needs of the child. Like my case, for example, I was a farm working kid, and the system spit me out because they can't accommodate for someone like me, who was working in the mornings in the asparagus, or working, every other day in the cherries or the apples, or, whatever orchard or whatever, harvest time there was. It kicked me out. And so what we need is, I think, a more accommodating school system that can, I think, be flexible enough for different, needs, that the individual child may have, as opposed to, being cookie cutter or so top down, that again, it would reject somebody like me. Those are things that the government can do.
Going back to, so Bush for President 2000, what was your work like in that campaign?
So they came after me because I was a councilman, and they somehow somebody or people, like party officials maybe, let them know that I was a Republican Latino in the Yakima Valley. And so when I got the call, they said, "Hey, you've been identified as someone who can help us out, and we wanted to know if you're interested." And basically what it would be is that we'd make you director of Latinos for Bush in the state of Washington. And your job would be to rally and mobilize and organize events on behalf of the president, create surrogates, who could speak on behalf of the president and promote his candidacy. And being a Republican, and from what I knew of George Bush, I accepted, and we did the work. And so we got out there and worked really hard.
What does that work look like in the year 2000? So 20 years ago, or 1999, what is that? What is grassroots mobilization specifically for Hispanic communities? What does that look like?
Well, it's not the kind of grassroots work that we do now, right? Ours is much more structured. It's a grassroots army of people. Basically, what we did back then was to create a group of folks across the state in eastern and the western parts of Seattle, in King County and Pierce County, Tacoma and Seattle, and then in the Pullman area on the west side, and then in the central part of Washington State, in the Yakima Valley and up towards Okanagan County, Wenatchee and those areas, where we had people who could get on the radio, who could do letters to the editor, who could do television if called to, and be surrogates for the state of Washington, to also get involved in debates that were being held across the country. There was no social media back there.
Right.
There was no Facebook, no Twitter, no nothing like that. So everything was done old school, right? And so basically it was just to create these surrogates across the state. And we had a group of about 40 to 50 Latinos, business leaders, faith, women, youth, all kinds of, different folks who were out there, just creating these opportunities to promote George Bush's candidacy in the state of Washington.
So
And by the way, that was like, coffee clutches and inviting people to your home and having, one-on-one meetings or group meetings and these kind of stuff. And then we did an event with George P. Bush in my home where we had like 200 people come over, and George P. addressed the group and went on about his dad. And they brought in media, television, radio, and print, and the whole thing, stuff like that.
Right. How did that go for y'all? How was what if you remember the numbers, or just generally how successful were you?
The state of Washington in the year 2000 had spiked their numbers of Latino votes for a Republican that year. I don't remember how much. It was. I just don't remember, but I know it was significant. From what I understand, it was Florida and Washington State that had the highest peak. Maybe we had something to do with it. I don't know.
Well, there's, what are your thoughts on, so it's my understanding is that Latino support at the national level for a national candidate for president, it tends to top out around 30 to 40%. And there's sort of a personalismo, it depends on the charisma of the candidate. George Bush got there, Trump got there, Mitt Romney, not so much. What do you think? And this may be, a very broad question, but just looking back at the past, 20 years of election cycles, what do you think a national candidate can do or can transmit that is going to generally be effective with Latino populaces?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is, I think Latinos across the country are not given the credit enough by non-Latinos, and even maybe Latinos themselves, that they think for themselves and that they make their decisions based on policy. You just mentioned that it was personality driven, and I'm sure there is an element of folks who may be motivated by a person's charisma and their personality.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I reject that. My sense, and this is in the conversations that I've had in the events that we've done in my interaction with Latinos across the country, that they are very, very well informed on the issues. The folks who get involved in the kind of meetings and the kind of events that we put together and who are engaged on policy, vote based on policy, very deliberate votes, and say, yeah, I want less taxes. Yes, I want somebody who's going to minimize and reduce the size and the scope of government. I want them off my back when it comes to regulations that can hinder my business from growing. I want to make sure that I have school choice, that I have better healthcare, that I preserve healthcare that is employer based, and I don't want Medicare for all. That I reject endless wars across the world, and I don't want liberal judges twisting the Constitution. Latinos make very deliberate choices based on policy decisions. And I think what's happened in the past was that there hasn't been enough engagement by those on the center right to inform and educate Latinos on where they stand on exactly those issues. And it's been the Democrats who, for decades, made the kind of investments and the kind of outreach to promote their agenda in their way. And which is why I think Latinos responded favorably to them, because they felt that at least the Democrat Party cares for us, that they're out to court us, and they're trying to do what's right. Even though I don't, agree with what they're doing, they care about me. So the case that I would make is that if a Republican does the kind of work that is needed, the engagement, expresses, their passion, their concerns, that they care, and then the merits of their ideas, and explains how their ideas work, that Latinos respond favorably to that. So you've seen that with a lot of candidates, like Cory Gardner, for example. Let me give you an example on that one. Colorado in 2008, Barack Obama wins Latinos by 75% in Colorado. And then Michael Bennet in 2010 wins Latinos by 90%. And so folks in Colorado thought that the Latino vote was baked in to the left, right? But Cory Gardner, who we endorsed that year and did a lot of the work for him and did a lot of the outreach and the mobilization, hired from the Latino community, courted Latinos, went into their chamber of commerces and their churches and their restaurants, and did the messaging and did everything. He got 45% of the Latino vote, dramatically reversed, the score. Will Hurd in District 23 in Texas, 75% Latino, a Republican Black challenger takes out a Latino Democrat incumbent in a 75% Latino district. So what I'm saying is this: I think Latinos, when they understand the choices that are before them, and the choices have been made clear, that they'll respond more towards the free society, free market candidate than for the other guy.
So let's talk about the LIBRE Initiative then. What has been the work? Describe what and you said you're in 14 states, and we can just stick with one. I assume y'all are working in Texas. What does the work look like for LIBRE Initiative to inform, to engage, to mobilize? What does that groundwork look like for y'all in the year 2020?
Yeah, so look, we're an advocacy organization. We have an agenda. We have a point of view. And the Constitution allows us the right to promote that point of view and to try to persuade others towards our point of view. Just like those on the center left have an agenda or a point of view on the kind of direction that they want for the country. And so what we try to do is to advance what we call the principles of a free society. That when individuals have more freedom, that they will be more prosperous, that they will thrive, and that they will be more innovative and inventive in I think creating the kind of society that where more people are prosperous. And so we believe freedom drives progress. And we honestly believe that top-down approach, where politicians who believe that more government is the answer, creates a society where instead of the individual now living out their life for their own aspirations and to achieve their own dreams, they're now living out their lives to achieve the dreams and the aspirations of politicians. And that is not a society that is better for all. It's better for some. And it creates a two-tiered system where those who are connected are favored. And that's I mean, we try to work against that. So we want a society where a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, not, for politicians. And so anyway, the point is, I preface, my answer in saying that because we truly believe that what we need to arrive at is a free society. And so how do you do that? Well, you need to change laws. You need to make sure that you preserve the freedoms that we have enshrined in our constitutions, and that you will not cede those freedoms to any politician for any reason. And so we want to make sure that Latinos, one, are informed and educated on how important their freedoms are that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights, and then mobilize Latinos in support of those freedoms, whether, you know, educational freedom, economic freedom, freedom of expression, freedom to possess, you know, firearms, whether the freedom to petition the government. So all these things I think are necessary for a free society, and each one is interdependent on the other. And Latinos, we want to make sure that they are also helping to preserve and defend these freedoms, so that they become a vanguard for these freedoms, and then also mobilize in support of policy champions who will also defend and protect these freedoms. I mean, that's basically what we're trying to do, is to preserve and defend a free society.
And so, but I'd be interested in knowing the nuts and bolts. And I said 2020, but I'd actually prefer to go back to 4 years ago. And I know you're not purely an election-based organization. That's not the work that y'all do. But thinking about, you know, you're saying you're picking out policy champions. You're advocating for these ideals that align more with center-right, with Republican candidates. What does that work look like in 2016? What is the nuts and bolts of mobilizing Latino support, engaging Latino communities regarding these ideas and these candidates?
Well, it's done in different ways, and keep in mind, a lot of this has to be done in compliance with federal law, right? So what I mean by that is, look, the only reason we get involved in elections is because politicians make laws,
right?
And you have to advocate for those laws. So you have to get involved in elections to get the policies you want. You want the policies that you want because they either benefit or they actually create consequences for people. So we have to get involved in public policy advocacy too. But then you have to get involved in the community also, because there are real things you can do at the community level that can help make a difference. All right, so here's the thing. We believe in freedom because freedom makes life better for people. And we want to make life better for people, which means you need to get involved in policy. And the reason you get involved in politics is to get policy. Anyways, so here's the thing. You need a 501c3 to educate people and to help the community at the community level. You need a 501c4
right.
to advance policy and advocate for policy change. And you need a PAC to get involved in elections. So it's all very complicated, and all has to do with compliance. So sometimes I'm talking to you as the chairman of LIBRE Action, and then sometimes as the president of the LIBRE Initiative, right. And then sometimes as, you know, the president or chairman of the LIBRE Institute, because they all do different things along the way to try to get reforms. It's a mess.
Yeah, sure.
But again, all this has to do with compliance. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because how you structure that is how you're going to operate, right? And you can't do elections if you're only a 501c3, and you can't do public policy advocacy to a certain level if you're only a 501c3. So you need to have all these designations. And it just takes a lot of legal work is what it is. So we have people who are involved in LIBRE Action who we've hired as contractors and who do the work come election time. We have full-time staff, you know, in offices as the LIBRE Initiative to do public policy advocacy. And then we have full-time staff who are designated only as 501c3 who do the work at the community level, because that's the end game, right? Is to make life better for people at the community level, that on a one-on-one level. So at the community level, at 501c3, what we do is to help people learn English, help people to learn how to launch and start up a business, and what they can anticipate, right? You know, in starting up a business, get their citizenship or their green card, help people to get a driver's license. In Nevada, for example, we've helped thousands, literally thousands get driver's licenses. Because if they don't get that, you know, the English or the driver's license or the GED or citizenship, they're restricted from the marketplace. And they don't have the same equal opportunity that you and I have. You know, you're going to graduate with a college degree with English and a driver's license. You're set up for success. But 33% of Latinos don't have a driver's or 50% in some states don't have a driver's license. 30% only speak Spanish. They're cut off from the marketplace. And so who's helping them? So that's what we do at the 501c3 level. At the same time, what we want to do is to make sure that they can send their kids to the right school, but you need policy reform for that. So through a 501c4, the LIBRE Initiative, we're at the state legislature level. We're in state capitals working on school choice to deregulate, to lessen the tax burden, to make sure that we're expand or trying to remove too much restrictions on licensing, on certification needs, so that people can braid hair without the government restricting them way too much and imposing fines or costs. All these things matter, right? And so you need to do that. And then, of course, we're trying to get the right people elected to pass the right laws to make life better for people. Sorry, that's a convoluted answer. But
no, it's a great answer. So 2020 then, in the context of the pandemic, I would imagine that doing things like teaching English to folks, engaging with communities, helping folks get driver's license. Here in Texas, there was a long part of the year where DPS was shut. You can even go to to DPS. How over the course of 2020 and the pandemic did y'all evolve y'all's work? What were some of the major challenges? And looking forward, hopefully within the next year, things will be returning to normal. What are you, hoping to get back to? What has changed?
So, what's really interesting, like Latinos, like non-Latinos, have developed a cynicism against parties, against media, right? They distrust politicians and they distrust media, right? Because the politicians are shoving them a bunch of information. Media is telling them a bunch of stuff, and you have to sort of glean out all the propaganda and try to get to the truth, to what is real and what isn't, right? About a candidate or this candidate or the Democrats. The Republicans are evil incarnate, and the Republicans will tell you that the Democrats, want to turn America into a socialist country. So what's the reality, right? And so this requires conversations, honest conversations on policy, on what we're facing as a Latino community. And so a lot of our work prior to the pandemic was done through what we call policy forums, where we would bring in Latinos and elected leaders to meet up and have these conversations. 200, 400 people, 500 people at a time. We would have also discussions at our offices about specific policy issues and delve into them, right? And where people were free to ask questions about immigration reform, about tax reform, about whatever. The pandemic changed all that because we couldn't meet. And so we had to shift a lot of what we did over to digital. And so Zoom became really important. Skype became really important, right? Where we could now connect through digital, platforms and continue to have these important, honest conversations about policy and how it impacted the Latino community. And real conversations, right? Not just, top down from the party. And it turns out, that Latinos are just as interested on all these issues as non-Latinos, and they want to hear from their elected officials, but they also want to have conversations amongst themselves in a way that is civil, in a way that is open and honest, and that you won't be judged, based on your question or your answers. And that's been really important for us to provide that kind of platform for the Latino community to hold these kind of conversations about these kind of issues that are so important. And yes, let's talk about the minimum wage, and let's talk about Amy Coney Barrett, and let's talk about, whatever it is, right, that is impacting non-Latinos, it's impacting Latinos. And so we need to have platforms where we can have these conversations. And that's mainly what we've done. I know people like to focus on the election part of what we do. That's fine. That's fine. That's fair. But more than anything, what we care about is policy. And the only reason we're involved in elections is because it impacts policy.
Have you been able to engage with communities as effectively via these digital means, or do you feel that there has been a drop off in how successfully you're able to do that?
Well, look, there is no equal to one-on-one.
No.
One-on-one is the most effective way that people communicate. Because you get a sense for the person and you get to, size up the person on what they're saying and look into their eye and just, body language, respond back and forth in real time. But, now having been forced, to open up these digital platforms, in a way, what it's done is expand our outreach, because of course you can have as many people as tune in. You can record it, post it on social medias, and then of course it gets fanned out to the world. It's there if you ever want to see these kind of conversations on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, on whatever, right? So it's because it's forced us to do this change. We've also quickly adapted, and we've tried to return back to some kind of normalcy. Like during this right in the last few months of the election, leading up to November, we did mobilize a lot of our volunteers, and we went door to door. We did the phone calls, we did the mailers, we did the TV, radio, and digital ads as well. It's what we call a multi-layered approach. To reach Latinos, there is no silver bullet. There is no one thing that you do, right? Oh, it's the Spanish commercial on Univision. It's not just that. We're also on MSNBC and on Fox News, or we listen to the radio, or go have an event at a church, at a school, at a university, at a chamber of commerce. Go to their door, their post office, or their mailbox. It's all these things, that you have to do to cut through the noise and reach Latinos where they're at.
I want to look back on the past 4 years and start just generally. What is seems pretty clear, as a center-right activist and someone who is engaged and knowledgeable in politics, what is your attitude towards President Trump?
So look, I mean, it's clear as daylight that his style is one that is aggressive, caustic. It's provocative. It's not, I think, one that is suited for the presidency, in that you have to be much more a statesman, diplomatic, more nuanced, more guarded with what you say, filtered. That's clear. It's rudo, like they say in Spanish. Having said all that, we agreed with a lot of his policies, on his nomination of judges who were constitutionalists, who would uphold the Constitution. We celebrated that. His tax reforms, we raved about that because we were 100% alignment. His deregulation, his increases on energy production on both public lands and private lands, phenomenal. Created thousands of jobs. There's 400,000 jobs dependent on energy just here in Texas, and a lot of Latinos benefit from that.
Yeah.
Big time. His pro-life policies, terrific. His defense of freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, fantastic. School choice and how he promoted that through his Secretary of Education, fantastic. Again, there's just issue after issue after issue where we wholeheartedly agreed, and we apologized to nobody in praising the president when we agreed with him. But we were also very honest when we disagreed with him. We didn't agree a lot with his trade policies. They were protectionist, and we were very public about that. There was a lot of times where we didn't agree with him on a lot of the immigration issues and his immigration policies, and we were very public about that, with apologies to nobody on the right either. So we pride ourselves in being principled, in being honest, and not being beholden to either the left or the right, to the Republicans or the Democrats. We believe in what we believe in, and that's what we're going to advance.
It's interesting that you bring up that issue of immigration, and obviously, you know, that's not the only issue that matters to Latinos, but the way that certain elements of the extreme right, I'm thinking of people like Joe Arpaio, like Chris Kobach, Stephen Miller, even to a certain extent in his rhetoric, Donald Trump, right? The rhetoric and some of the policies that seem to be punitive and aimed specifically at Latino communities, the rhetoric that can be degrading. You know, we saw in President Trump's announcement speech back in 2015, the rhetoric he used was, in my opinion, incredibly degrading of Mexican communities. But at the same time, both parties want to be, or they say they want to be, you know, big tent parties, and they want to be diverse and they want to be welcoming. Do you think that that element of republicanism, of the Republican Party, is a barrier to, to Latino engagement, to convincing Latinos or presenting republicanism as a viable option for Latinos? What is that? Is that just, yeah, I guess that's my question. Are they a barrier? And if so, what do you do about that?
Well, I mean, look, I think obviously it causes pause in a lot of Latinos, right? When they hear somebody who is has that tone or that kind of language that may be indifferent to the immigrant community. Sure. I think in the same way, there are those who are on the extreme left who are very friendly to socialist policies that also causes pause for Latinos. Well, I don't want a socialist America, but I don't want, you know, an anti-immigrant America, right? And so I think a lot of Latinos are forced to weigh the agenda set of either candidate. And they fundamentally, I think they ask themselves one question when they walk into the voting booth. And the question is, will my life or the life of my family be better if I vote for this one or that one, right? And the only way you can come to an answer on that is to, again, weigh the full set of things in their totality. And I don't think they just say, well, he said this about immigrants, and therefore I'm not going to vote against him. I don't think that's the calculus. And I don't think they say, well, you know, that person said this about socialism and sounded too friendly, I'm not going to vote for him. I think they weigh everything. That's what I mean about Latinos being very judicious and very deliberate about, you know, how they arrive at a vote. They ultimately, they're going to vote based on how that person's going to govern and the policies that they're going to govern with, right? You know, and so that's why I'm very convinced that Latinos are not wired left and they're not wired right. You know, they vote sometimes out of pure self-interest, and that's okay, because that's what non-Latinos do. You know, is this person going to create job opportunities for my son who's just graduating from college? Is this person going to restrict me from, you know, going to work in the oil field? Or is that person going to, you know, put judges who are not going to respect the Constitution? All these things are being asked by Latinos like non-Latinos. And so, look, I hear you about, you know, like Chris Kobach and a Stephen Miller, you know, who, you know, one would wish, you know, they'd keep quiet, but they're part of the party, and you know, AOC and Bernie Sanders are part of that party, and so you just have to weigh both sets. Right. I guess it's ultimately, and that's an individual choice.
To talk specifically about this past year, the politics of the pandemic and the response to the virus, very politicized. It would seem like from both sides, that just how the response has been. What are your thoughts on here in the state of Texas, the response from a Republican administration to the virus? What do you think they did well? What do you think if you think they did something not well, what are your thoughts on this response?
Well, I think the president is not given enough credit for not bearing down hard with all the full force and power of the federal government, because he could have taken advantage of the situation and really have been a restrictionist and imposed way more than he did. Even so, there was a lot of restriction put on by state governments on businesses and public institutions. I think they screwed the bolts on a little too tight, to be honest with you. But fine, people were just reacting to what they didn't know. There was a lot of misinformation and ignorance out there. I think what the administration did right, again, it was not impose too much power, federal power. They hurried the vaccine and accelerated the process by deregulating. What they also did was in healthcare, they legalized telehealth across the country. And Latinos in remote parts of Arizona, in counties, in state of Washington, and in Florida and across the country, you can now talk to your doctor through digital access, and get get the kind of help that you were needing that otherwise you couldn't before that. I thought that was fantastic, and they're gonna, I think, continue that. So telehealth and the innovation of telehealth was a really good thing. The acceleration of the vaccine, I think also, look, I think the federal government has been, believe it or not, I think very quick to react with financial assistance through, the one-time payments, the unemployment, the fact that the federal government or Donald Trump had to activate quickly a testing system that did not exist prior to this, and did it as speedy as possible. I think he doesn't get credit enough for that. So look, I think there was a lot of things that they did right. Where maybe it could have been better was just, better flow of intercommunication between the federal government and the states. There's just too many variables that are so different from state to state, and it caused a lot of confusion. Now, of course, the distribution of the vaccine is slow in some states, fast in others. Go figure. There's just no continuity to it or uniformity to it. So anyways, there's a lot of frustration.
Yeah, complex. What are your thoughts on what occurred on January 6th? I assume you're watching that at least at some point throughout the day. What is going on through your mind when you see folks that are associated with the extreme fringe, obviously not the mainstream, but the extreme fringe of the right? What are your thoughts when you see what is happening there, and just what are your reflections on what that means for this country?
Well, look, let me first say, preface by saying that those folks who did that were criminals. What they did was un descaro. It is. I don't know who could have anticipated that. That is just. It was incredible to see. It was surreal, and each one of them that trespassed in that form and committed vandalism should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. If you want to call them domestic terrorism, I don't have any problem with that, to be honest with you. It was people who lost their minds. I think the sort of this mob mentality took over, and that's what happened. But it also was provoked by the sense of frustration that people felt because they weren't being heard. Look, I think we had remained silent on post-election what had been happening because we wanted to be patient on some of the accusations that were being made about the fraud. And so we were being silent and patient because we were waiting for people to show what, the evidence of this fraud. The thing is, it never came, right? And so we had reconciled with the fact that Biden was going to be president since day one. And we never had any resistance to that. And to this day, Joe Biden is our president, and let's work together, and I wish him the best because his success is our success, obviously, right? But I think these people felt that they were not being heard. And just as the folks, in the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa folks, feel that they haven't been heard, and they've their extreme factions have also committed violence, have attacked federal courthouses, police stations across the country, committing violence. I absolutely and without reservation condemn any political violence, any vandalism, anything that is done to hurt anybody else in the name of politics or policy should be condemned. It's flat out wrong. And I think the president should have been clear and more direct about that much earlier. Do I blame him for what they did? No. The people who did it should be blamed for that. They're the ones who committed the act. They're the ones who committed the crime, and they should be prosecuted for that. I didn't hear anything from the president that provoked that. I mean, I don't know how. I resent a little bit that the media would lay blame quickly for political reasons on any individual who had nothing to do with it. Just like I wouldn't blame any of the Democrat politicians for the violence that is being committed by the extreme faction of BLM or Antifa or whatever. Any political violence should be condemned.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the future of your party.
By the way, can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course. Parentheses, because I want to make it relevant to our community. I fully recognize, though, having said all that, that Latinos, especially in the 40s and 50s and 60s, who were marginalized, who felt that they were on the outside looking in because they were, had to do sometimes things that were uncouth. And what I mean is they had to do the protests, the marches, the walkouts. These were all political expressions that were nonviolent, but people were uncomfortable with those things. But I justify those because it was, the unheard being heard, and again, doing these things that were uncomfortable but had to be done. Today, I honestly feel that Latinos more than ever are on the inside also now, looking out, and we're at the table. We have some really talented, amazing kids who work on both sides of the aisle, as congressional assistants, as congressional members, as Senate members, as Senate assistants, working at the White House as staff, and across state legislatures. I think we can now honor the systems that we have in place, right? Because we have a place at the table, but before we did not. That is not the same situation with these folks. These folks also have representatives who have a place at the table, who are well represented, and there's no reason for the violence.
One of my questions, I'll just piggyback off of that. Do you, with you're looking for, you say, these policy champions, you're engaged with Latino conservatives. Are there, at the national level, are there any figures that you have in your mind sort of as a potential rising Latino Republican star? Because it seems like that would be, obviously we have Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. I don't know if anyone would refer to them as rising stars, but do you see anyone there on the national level who, and maybe it is one of those, but in your opinion, that fits that category that you say, look out for this person. This is a Latino presence that will be known in this party and that has the potential to do good?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never been one who's been driven by personality. And I've never liked the Messiah thing, for the Latino community. Look, thanks Cesar Chavez, but I don't want him to be representative of all Latinos, con todo respeto, or anybody else, or Marco or Susana Martinez or AOC or whatever, right? I like, I have to explain this because people might take it the wrong way. I respect their work. I respect their body of work, of course. Marco and Ted Cruz and folks like Carlos Curbelo and these folks who did great work on the center right, and Jamie Herrera Butler in Washington State, all great people. I think what I like seeing are the kind of folks that just put their nose to the grindstone and just do the hard work. Like sometimes I've seen like Mario Diaz-Balart staffers working anonymously, on immigration reform, having those meetings that nobody sees, with the center left, bridging people together, people, on the left and the center and the right, working, behind the scenes, crafting legislation, making sure that their principles are meeting, are talking, are negotiating. Latinos who are drafting up, the bills at the state level, at the federal level, who are doing the advocacy work, who are just out there doing the actual work, and they don't mind who gets the credit, and they just want to do what's right, for the right reasons. I think I admire that a lot, and I want to see more of that. Fine, if there's going to be a personality out there who's going to, be the tip of the spear and the lightning rod and all these issues, like a Ted Cruz, look, you got to respect that, because they're taking the hits, and they deflect, from the real work that's being done. But my admiration goes out to those folks, who do the work.
Right. Back before I forget, so the last sort of question I had on just sort of the current state of the Republican Party is looking at the future. What are your thoughts on where the party is headed and where it should go? It would seem that there is an entrenchment in Trumpism, and again, what you just mentioned, this sort of this cult of personality, this messiah figure. It would seem.
You know what, man? I reject that one too, because you get those factions on both sides, and I know that the media likes to play up Trump, and they're obsessed with Trump, and I don't think they're going to let Trump go for the longest time. And I think they want to project those on the center right as people who are consumed with Trump, when really they're the ones that are consumed with Trump. I think what the Trumpism that they're confusing is people who felt heard for the first time, blue collar workers who were getting the shaft and were heard by Trump and were being, I think that Trump was considerate of. I think those are the folks, look, of course you're going to get, folks on, who are personality driven, but that happens on both sides. I think right now, the real division, it's not between the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. The real division is between this urban, college-educated, folks who control, our institutions of government, of tech, of education, who look down on the second group, which is this rural, high school educated, blue-collar, working class, who love their country, their God, and their rights, and are resented for it, and feel resented for it. And I think Latinos are identifying more with the second group than with the first group. That's where I think a lot of folks jumped on the for Trump, because they felt, again, more relatable to that second group who identified with Trump, and so they identified with Trump. But to project that somehow, they're driven by personality, again, I think people are just making judicious choices about policy and the kind of direction that they want to see America, drift towards. And it is one who looks out for the working class, for opportunity, who it's okay to say you love your country and you love your God and you love your freedoms, and people, obviously will vote their values and how they think. But I think, for those on the center right to also be too judgmental of those on the center left, and to call everything socialism is also misguided. I mean, we need to have some self-awareness, right? So, but there is a division, yeah, but I don't think it's so much in the Republican Party. Look, I'll remind you that in 2008, the Republicans got their ass kicked, and Barack Obama became president, and there was a lot of recrimination. There was reports that were done and how they had lost Latinos and whatever. 2 years later, they won the majority in the House again. They won 20 state legislatures. They flipped them across the country. They got 7 Senate races back, and were back on their way, you know, and soon, you know, took the leadership in the Senate. So what I would say is these are just, you know, pendulum swings, and it's going to swing back, and people will again reflect on what they did wrong, and then recuperate, and things will be okay in the Republican side. But I think sometimes we tend to project what we desire in the other party. You know, there's this division,
Right?
this, you know, personality driven. Of course, there's that, but look, it happens on both sides.
Yeah, I respect that answer. I guess my question is, or a more specific way to put the question is, in 2024, it would seem, at least, and, you know, just my perspective, it would seem that if Trump wants to be the candidate, he will be the candidate. I don't think there's any real challenger that could beat Trump in a Republican primary at this point. Who knows what could happen in 4 years?
But maybe, but only if there isn't another Republican candidate who's not listening to why Americans voted for, you know, Republicans voted for Trump.
That's my question, though, for you. Then, would you
felt ignored? And but to make it sound like they're a bunch of dumbass zombies, you know?
No, that's not at all what I.
Of a Trump. That's not the case.
No.
It's because, you know, people were hurting. People were scraping their knees in this economy, and they weren't being listened to. And Trump comes along, and yeah, he spoke, you know, tosco and rudo, and so it was offensive to many. But the policies he was talking about and he implemented were pro-growth, were pro-opportunity, and put an emphasis on strengthening America, not America being the police to the world and advancing endless wars and being this globalist, you know, caretaker. You know, so anyways, I'm just saying.
Yeah, certainly. I guess my question is, would you prefer to see a candidate who taps into the policy and the ideology that you are, but who does not have that baggage?
If you could have a candidate with the elegance of a Barack Obama and the policies of a Trump, except the immigration issue, you'd have a hell of a monster. I mean, that'd be a beast to behold, right? Because I liked Barack Obama as a person, but I hated his policies, hated him, and opposed them and resisted them. And same thing with Joe Biden. You know, he's a good guy, I'm sure. You know, seems like a nice guy. But I'm probably gonna be fighting on 90% of his policies. I don't agree with him, and I'm not gonna apologize to anybody for that. You know, I want to see my country free, and prosperous and productive and industrious, not one that is going to be beholden to the rest of the world, bogged down by overregulation, overtaxation, judges who are going to interpret the Constitution according to whatever the hell, you know, their whim is. So yeah, I mean, these are all things that matter to Latinos.
I guess I really just have one more question, and you know, you've mentioned your what would be the term, your drive to advance the free society, right? That this is something that seems to be a driving force in your life. Looking over the, you know, coming not just 4 years, but 10 years, what are you hoping to see? What are you hoping to be a part of, especially with regards to Latino communities, young Latinos who are coming of voting age or entering political life for the first time? What are you hoping to achieve over the next 10 years or so?
Well, I'd love to vastly diminish the role that government plays in our lives. The imposition of politicians in our lives, on how government has usurped the free market system, our education, the role of family, the role of the church, even now, especially during COVID, the restrictions that they put by fiat has just been breathtaking. Governors have way too much power. And so, but I'd also like to see a society that is more tolerant, that is more compassionate and understanding, civil, and respectful of each other. And the only way I think we can bring that about is to be an example of that. And so we don't teach our activists and our volunteers to confront politicians in the halls of government. We don't teach them to troll on social media. We don't attack people based on their personalities or for personal reasons. But we have civil discussions, honest, open discussions on policy, on the merits of policy. And we'll detail the reasons that anchor our ideas without attacking, without vitriol. And so I think as the most influential center-right Latino organization in the country, at least the largest, we have a responsibility to show how we can do it effectively and how to do it right. And again, that's defending free speech, free expression. That if you have a better idea, bring it. You know, let's have an open conversation about it. We're not going to stifle you. We're not going to censor you. We're not going to cancel you. We want to give you a platform, give you an opportunity, because, you know, I'd like to hear if there is a better way of doing things. So anyways, that's what I mean by about a free society is actually reverse the flow of so much power and so much money and so much control that politicians have in our lives. Because look, at the end of the day, as the power and the control and the money of government grows, there is a proportionate diminishment of power and money and control to the individual. But as the freedom of the individual grows, innovation grows, prosperity grows. And I think people are now free to, you know, live out their destiny, you know, according to them, not according to what a politician wishes on us.
Well, Daniel, Mr. Garza, that's been a pleasure speaking with you. Always good to have a good conversation.
Sorry, I ranted a bunch of stuff, but
no, that's what we want. That makes for good content for us. So I appreciate it.